If you're buying pasture-raised chicken from the store thinking it's the best option, you're missing something big because what's behind the label isn't always what you think. Hi, I'm Dr. Ronald Hill, and I've spent over 25 years in clinical nutrition. And as a rancher who raises his own pasture-raised chicken, I've seen both sides of the story. Well, today, I want to show you why where you buy your food, especially pasture-raised chicken, matters far more than what the labels claim. If you're watching this video, no doubt pasture-raised chicken is already a part of your diet, or it's something that you're strongly considering making a part of your diet. And if you're like many others, you've probably stood in the grocery store, picked up a package of pasture-raised chicken and looked at it and wondered to yourself, do these label claims actually stack up to the level that I think they do? Which brings us to the real point of this video, which is, how do you buy pasture-raised chicken? There's only two approaches that you consistently have available to you. The first is the grocery store or some retail outlet where you can stand there and have that conversation with yourself about quality, or you can buy direct from a local provider, a producer that is out there producing pasture-raised chicken. But I thought to try to help you understand which avenue might be better for you, it likely makes sense for us to look at some key points to consider when you're deciding between these two. Likely the most important factor when it comes to deciding between buying from a store or buying direct from a producer is simply asking yourself, can I trust the source that I'm buying from here? Well, when you're buying store-bought, you essentially are relying on a marketing team to give you insight about how that product is produced, anything that's relevant for you in regards to nutritional quality, nutritional value. That's all being delivered to you by a marketing team. And if anything changes in regards to the quality, to the sourcing, to the policies or structures that govern how that product is being produced, unfortunately, guys, marketing teams aren't going to pick up the phone and call you. So you as the consumer, you're never going to know. In contrast, when it comes to buying direct from the producer, there is a much higher level of trust here. You're depending on building the relationship, and you're not looking at packaging. The relationship trumps packaging. And one conversation can tell you far more than a dozen labels or stickers are ever going to tell you. Just to give you an analogy on this, think about the first time you meet someone. You know, just your perception of that individual, your intuition tells you this is a good person or this is a person I need to be wary of. Your intuition is going to guide you when it comes to interacting with producers as well. And it's going to tell you, do you immediately have that trust factor or do you not immediately have that trust factor? And you're only going to find trust in relationships. That's just the nature of human interaction. So you need that relationship with your producer to be able to develop that trust. All the regulations, all the policies, all the things that organizations use to make standards about food or to claim standards about food, all these regulations are all second place to building a relationship. Relationship, not regulations. What about labels versus reality? Well, when it comes to store-bought, again, you're solely depending on labels. And so if you look at a term like pasture-raised, you have to immediately ask yourself, well, what does pasture-raised mean? I mean, technically, this is not a term that has a solid, firm definition. In fact, just to illustrate that, people are using the term pasture-raised for cattle. Well, of course, cattle are pasture-raised. We don't even really need to have that conversation. So it just goes to illustrate that this term is being overutilized because they understand that you as the consumer want to see this term, and so they will bend and manipulate that term to attract you to buy the product that has that term on the label. You know, pasture-raised may mean simply that animals have minimal exposure to the outdoors. There's no firm definition here, and it could mean that animals are still raised in large-scale barns and have brief exposure to being outside. You also don't get any insight into looking at the sourcing on the animals. The reality is that when you look at these store-bought products, even when they have these labels on them, these are often, in fact, these are pretty much always coming from multiple sources. They're not coming from a single destination. So they're coming from multiple regions. That means that you've got multiple standards and systems that are being used to produce a product that you're buying in the store. Well, how does that contrast against buying direct and having that relationship with that producer that you can go to? Well, in this scenario, pasture-raised means pasture-raised. I know here at Harvest Hills Ranch, one of the things that we like to do is we like to post pictures on our social media or in other videos that I produce about our birds being out on pasture. We don't have one specifically staged shot that we're using over and over and over. We like to see and illustrate them on multiple parts of the pasture and multiple times of the year. What does it look like in the winter, in the summer, in the fall, in the spring, all the different seasons? What about when they're right behind the cows, or when they're right in front of the cows, or when they're right adjacent to the ducks? Like all these things that we want to illustrate, but when you have a store-bought product, you're not seeing these things. So these things are, you're just depending on the label to paint a picture in your head, as opposed to actually being able to see the product in motion as it's being raised before it ends up in your kitchen and on your family's plate. The other thing here is that these are single source, right? So when you're buying, this is the label versus the reality. The reality is that when you're buying from the producer, it's not multiple sources. It's a single source, a single ranch, a single farm. So the who, the what, the when, the how, all the questions, well, they can be answered much easier. Convenience. Now here's a word that a lot of folks continue to lean on because they think, well, I can go to the store, it's right there, it's available, it's convenient, and I can pick it up and I can go home. Hold on, pump the brakes. Is it really more convenient? Let me pose this picture to you. You're walking through the grocery store and you pick up a product, it says pasture-raised, you look over the label, you feel good about it, and then the next time you come into that store, you're looking for pasture-raised chicken and you notice that it's from a different vendor. It's not from the same source. So now you've got to go through the entire process again of mentally validating whether that product is meeting your criteria. And the reality is that there's no consistency in those products or in those labels. So there's this mental validation because of new vendors, new products, inconsistencies in what's available to you that aren't being factored in. If you look at buying from a ranch directly or from a farm directly, when you're buying direct, there's one product there. There's no changes in the labels, and generally when something does change, the ranch is going to make a notification about that, so you have clarity about it. But every time you go to order that product for your family to put on your family's plate, you're looking for good, healthy, nourishing food. The first time you go through that mental checklist and say, yes, this product met my criteria, every time you go back to order that product, you've already done that mental checklist. You don't have to go through and validate that product every single time again, because you know the standards and the systems that that producer is using. And when you order direct, it's much more convenient both mentally and because you can go online and pretty much across the board now have products shipped direct to your doorstep. The convenience factor, how much easier does it get than having it show up directly at your doorstep? So whereas maybe we prior thought that convenience was an advantage to buying store-bought, well, it turns out these days, whether you're looking at it both in terms of the time you have to invest to acquire the product or the time you have to invest to make sure that that product is actually meeting the standards that you have, it turns out direct is actually more convenient. The next area that we're going to look at is an area that is routinely overlooked. In fact, it's an area that I almost never hear anyone talk about, and irrespective of what happens in the field, even if it's done correctly, if you're not paying attention to the processing, it can undo all of the great work that was done in the field raising that animal on pasture. When you look at store-bought products are raised on an industrial scale. They're raised on really, really large scales. And so that means that when they're raised in that manner, that product is being trucked to a large processing facility, and large processing facilities are often, just because of the nature of that business and because they need to run so much volume to keep the stability in that business, they're often not just processing pasture-raised birds there, they're also processing animals that are raised in a conventional system. And they're not switching the internal operation of these processing facilities, these large-scale processing facilities, to accommodate the pasture-raised birds. The processes that they use in the conventional system are being applied to the processing of birds that are raised in large scale on pasture. And the problem with that is that the dips they use, the chlorine baths, all these things that you as the consumer do not want interfacing with your meat, do not want having contact with your meat, well, guess what? It's having contact with your meat, because again, there's no difference there. And while that label may look clean, unfortunately, the system is actually still dirty. So you don't really have as clean of a product as you anticipate that you have. When you're looking at direct are using small processing facilities. Like for us, we use a small family farm processing facility. It's still USDA processor. There's still USDA oversight. So all the governance, all the standards that go into the large scale facilities still adhere to the small scale facilities. The difference here is that you've got much fewer people touching your product. That product is handled in a much more efficient and less toxic way is probably the best way to say this. And for example, I know in the facility they use an organic hydrogen peroxide as their disinfectant. Hydrogen peroxide, a substance that is produced within the human body. So you have to take the processing side into the equation also when you're looking at buying from the store versus buying direct. You're eating pasture-raised chicken because you care about your health. Otherwise, you wouldn't be seeking out a food that is stated to have higher nutrient density. But let's examine that nutrient density for a moment here. When you're looking at a store-bought product, and again, they're in more large-scale production systems, when you're looking at these products, the main factor that is influencing the nutritional value of that product is the feed that they're being given. So, are they being given corn? Are they being given soy? Are they being given something else that maybe you don't want that could negatively influence the nutritional profile? And also ask yourself, what's the quality of the pasture that they're being raised on? Well, that obviously has a huge impact as well. If they're being raised on pasture that is very devoid of any lush forage, the grasses are really short, there's barren ground, that's going to create a much different nutrient and forage availability for that pasture-raised chicken as compared to being on lush pastures where they have access to a greater diversity of bugs. They can eat different forages out there. Yes, they're going to have supplemental food. That's just the nature of raising any chicken. They need that supplemental feed to optimize their health and their growth. But the environment that's around them also drastically changes what the final nutrient value in the product is. And so if you're looking at, for example, the fats in the product, having that animal in an environment where their forage is most optimal is also going to optimize the fatty acid profiles that they have, which equates to just lower inflammation. Well, what's one of the most consistent factors among all chronic disease? It's inflammation and the inability to resolve that inflammatory process. One of the key things that we can do to resolve that inflammatory process is be mindful not just about what we're putting in our mouth, but also where is that food that we're putting in our mouth being raised at? How is it being cared for? Because ultimately, if it doesn't have nutritional quality, a high nutritional density to it, it's just sustenance. And we need the nutrition there to optimize our human health. The last point that I'm going to share here is on food security and stability. This may be, in our current era, the most important thing to consider depending on how you look at world events. When you look at buying things in the store, step back for a minute and just ask yourself, how did that product get to the store? How many hands did it have to cross through, meaning who produced it, where was it processed at, where was it stored at, how was it trucked to the final location? What about the stability of the store that you're actually finding that product in? These are all factors that you have to consider when you're looking at just that single product on the shelf. There's a lot of instability in a centralized system like that, because when one facet of the system stops, everything stops and you don't end up with the final product. Well, when you contrast that to buying direct from a ranch or from a farm, that is not the case. You are dealing with a decentralized system, and decentralized systems are not dependent on a grouping of entities or a small number of individuals controlling a large group of entities that influence your food supply. In contrast, there's more stability because you're not only dealing with a decentralized system, you also have direct connection to the person that's producing your food. And so when those trucks stop, well, your food supply doesn't, and inherently you have more security and stability in your food system because you decided to buy direct. You want to eat clean, but labels aren't going to get you there. Relationships will. Do your homework, meet your rancher, and ask the questions that are on your mind. And if you want to see what we do out at Harvest Hills Ranch, well, we'll show you exactly how we do it all. Oh, hey, and if you've ever had the question, is it better if I buy whole birds or cut chickens? Well, don't miss this next video because it could change the way that you shop for chicken forever.